Hello everybody, and welcome to Linguavid, an open door to the world. Today's video lesson is a Level A1 tutorial, Adverbs of Frequency. In Spanish, Adverbios de Frecuencia. Today you will learn about their placement in sentences and their frequency level use. So let's get started. The first word you see here is siempre, siempre, which means always. The next word is casi siempre, casi siempre, translates almost always. The next word you see here is normalmente, normalmente, which means usually or normally. The next word you see here is a menudo, which means often. A menudo, often. The next word you see here is a veces, sometimes. The next word is raramente, raramente, which means rarely. The next word you see here is casi nunca, which means hardly ever, hardly ever. And the next word, nunca, nunca, which means never, never. Now let's move on to the next diagram. As you can see here, the word siempre, as you recall, means always. And that shows 100% as far as the graph looks. Let's look at the next word. It means casi siempre, which means almost always. The next word you'll see here is muchas veces, muchas veces. And look at the graph. It means many times. Okay? Muchas veces, many times. The next word you see here is algunas veces, and that means sometimes. So you can hear a veces, algunas veces, same thing. The next word you see here is pocas veces, and that means a few times. One more time, pocas veces. The next word you see here is casi nunca, and that means hardly. Casi, hardly, nunca, ever. Remember, the two have to work together. Casi nunca, hardly ever. And the last word, of course, nunca. And what does that mean? Never. Nunca. Never. So now that we have seen the adverbs of frequency in Spanish, it's very simple to remember. If you just use a few like in English, you'll always have a few words you can use to talk about the frequency of doing something. Let's move on now to the placement in the phrase. Now, with a name, the adverb of frequency is placed between the noun and the verb. For example, Juan siempre se afeita por la mañana. John always shaves in the morning. As you can see here, siempre, the adverb of frequency, is between the noun Juan and se afeita, shaves. Let's move on. When we have it without the name, it goes before the verb at the beginning of the sentences. Example, casi siempre se maquilla despacio. Almost always, makeup is placed slowly. Now, se maquilla despacio talks about se, the subject, and what the subject does. Maquilla places makeup on, despacio, slowly. So here we have casi siempre, the adverb of frequency is in the beginning and right before the verb. Se maquilla despacio, the action of placing makeup on slowly. Let's move on. Now we'll look at some examples. The first example you see here says, Medellín siempre es una ciudad bonita. Medellín is always a beautiful city. As you can see, it has a name, so the adverb of frequency is going to go after the name and before the verb. Es una is a, and is being the verb. Let's move on to another example. Los gigantes casi siempre juegan muy bien al fútbol. The Giants almost always play very well at football. As you can see, we have the name Los Gigantes. Casi siempre, almost always, play very well at football. Now, you got to remember always that frequency has different levels. You can do it either every day, every month, or every year. Let's look at some examples. Todos los días, every day. Todos los meses, every month. Todos los años, every year. Let's go to the next one. Cada día, each day. Cada mes, each month. Cada año, each year. So keep that in mind. Todos, every, cada, each. Let's move on. Una vez, dos veces al día. One time or two times a day. Una vez, dos veces al mes. One time or twice a month. And the last one, una vez, dos veces a la semana. Once or twice a week. Now we have normalmente. And when you see mente, it's almost a hint that in English the word will end in li. Normalmente, normally. A menudo, often. A veces, sometimes. One more time. Normalmente. A menudo. A veces. Very good. Well, now it's your turn. Let's see how well you can place these sentences in order of how they should describe an action. Come en la oficina algunas veces. So, eats at the office sometimes. How can we put that sentence to show a level of frequency? Think you got it? Well, let's look. Algunas veces come en la oficina. As you could see, since there was no noun, we use algunas veces at the beginning of the sentence and before the verb. So it comes out to algunas veces come en la oficina. Let's look at the next sentence. Duerme 8 horas casi nunca. So duerme, sleeps, 8 horas, 8 hours, almost never. Think you got it? Well, let's look. Casi nunca duerme 8 horas. Hardly sleeps 8 hours. Hardly ever. Very good. The next sentence. Los dientes siempre se lava. The teeth always brushed, cleaned. Think you got it? Well, let's look. Siempre se lava los dientes. Always brushes his or her teeth. Very good. Let's move on. Al teatro vamos nunca. Theater, go, never. Think you can put that in a sentence? Well, let's look. Nunca vamos al teatro. We never go to the theater. Very good. Let's move on to the next sentence. Juega pocas veces al football. Plays few times football. Think you can make a sentence out of that with the adverb of frequency? Well, let's see how good you are. Pocas veces juega al football. Very few times he plays football. Very good. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on the adverbs of frequency. And remember, practice makes perfect. I look forward to seeing you again in our next video. Thank you.